Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. In partnership with The Balance, we have created a fantastic series for October, which is National Financial Planning Month. Joining us for this segment, we have Kristin Meyers. She's Editor-in-Chief over at The Balance. And Kristin, probably one of the most key components of financial planning, of course, is preparing for retirement fund. But just as important is starting with an emergency fund.
I love this topic, and I love that you started there with that emergency fund, because so many folks, frankly, look at their 401k or their IRA or Roth IRA as kind of a rainy day savings account if they ever run into trouble and they need money. And you do not want to look at your retirement accounts as that. So you really want to start by building that emergency fund to make sure that you have at minimum 3 months worth of expenses so that if you ever do run into trouble, and of course we've all seen so many folks dealing with that lately throughout this pandemic, you don't want to tap into those retirement accounts. You want to be able to just go straight over to your savings to take care of some of those expenses, whether it's rent or mortgage or anything else that you might have.
So let's talk about setting a retirement budget. And then, of course, the key question is, how much am I going to need?
You know, everyone asks that question, right? And the long story short is it depends, and we'll get to that in a second. But first, you do have to figure out how much you even need to save, you know, for your retirement. So you have to figure that out by doing a budget. You need to really take into account what you're currently spending now. How much does it cost for you to live right now in this moment? Paying for your house, for example, or your healthcare expenses. And then you need to really try to account for how much you think you're going to be spending after you retire. So some line items might go away. Perhaps you've already purchased your house, but you're still going to have to pay property taxes. Some expenses are actually going to increase over time, right? Younger folks spend a lot less on healthcare than older folks do. So you really want to figure out how much money that you are going to be spending into retirement, and then you can figure out how much you are going to need. Now, this is a number that is different for everyone. But in essence, what you're going to do is you're going to take the income that you would like to have, whether that's $100,000, $50,000, $1 million, and then you're going to multiply that by the number of years that you think you are going to be retired. It is roughly 25 years right now, but perhaps you're retiring earlier, perhaps you're retiring later. You can make that adjustment. And that final number is then going to be the amount that you're really going to need to save in retirement. And a lot of folks underestimate it. So you really want to be good about those calculations.
And you had brought up health insurance before. We know how expensive healthcare is in the US. How do you determine what your options are?
You know, you have to first ask yourself if you have health insurance, if you're going to be on some other kind of benefits plan, and you have to understand if you're going to be on something like Medicare, for example, which will help chip away at some of those healthcare expenses. Do you have pre-existing conditions? These are all questions that you are going to need to ask yourself.
And how do we know how retirement income is taxed?
This is a great question because that money that is sitting in your 401k or Roth IRA is going to be treated a little bit differently, at least when it comes to Uncle Sam. So when you're putting money into your Roth IRA or those traditional IRAs, you've paid taxes on them. On the Roth IRA, you've paid taxes on it already. 401k, however, goes in essentially pre-tax. And so the government does treat, and these are just two of several different retirement accounts that you might have access to. And so the government will tax them differently when you do start to make those withdrawals. So you really want to make sure, figure out what account you will be using, or perhaps if you have multiple accounts, and figure out what the tax structure is going to look like. And then the other part that you really need to remember is when you are retiring, because age does come into play.
Right.
Now, you're usually around 60, 59 and a half when you retire, and that will affect the taxes.
And that's a great lead into my last question here. How do you know when it's time to start taking these distributions and deriving income from your retirement?
Well, the money is yours, so you technically can take it whenever you want. Unfortunately, however, if you take it a little bit sooner than you should, and again, I mentioned it's around 59 and a half, you will be penalized for that. And so you really want to make sure, depending on what account you have, that you know when you can make some of those withdrawals.
All right. And what if you have a 401k, which everyone should take advantage of at work, especially if your company matches?
Well, if your company matches, then you want to at least put in however much your company matches. So if you they match 6%, 100% at 6%, you should at least be putting in 6%. And then you just want to make sure, especially when it comes to some of those IRAs, that you're paying attention to not just those contribution limits, they do change every year, but also even sometimes those income caps.
All right. Thank you for joining us for National Financial Planning Month. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.